Welcome to the Santa Clarita Valley Signal News Podcast. I'm your host, Aron Bender. A big week in California politics as Gavin Newsom survives a recall vote. Reaction now from College of the Canyon's Political Science Department Chair David Andrus.
Most of us in the political science field, we weren't surprised because the tracking polls looked pretty good, and in terms of reliability, and that Newsom had an edge. It also was more reliable than maybe polling in other races across the country because of the party makeup of California that's skewed so heavily toward Democrats. So a little bit of surprise that it was by the margin that it was, but at the same time, upon reflection, not really, because of the fact that once I think everyone is in agreement that once Elder got into the race, it gave Gavin Newsom some contrast and allowed him to define the race. So the takeaways are really that Newsom was rattled, and essentially that there is it is really, I think the takeaways are really more about the Republican Party and what they're going to do next. There's some uncertainty on whether or not Newsom is in fact, even though today in the LA Times there is some new polling that suggests that he will defeat handily, if the race were held today, other Republican candidates. I think the bigger issue is, how do Republicans build a coalition to challenge Newsom or any other Democratic candidate moving forward, especially next year's election. So I think the problem is that you have the base, which is speaking loudly and clearly, and you have Republican operatives that understand that in order to win statewide election, there has to be a broader coalition. And I think the takeaway is that the Republican Party is quite fragmented ideologically, and that is going to make it really difficult for them to bring some balance into the California political system.
Can California Republicans find a candidate who is both able to rally the base, but get some Democrats and independents on their side to draw such you got to draw such a drastic contrast to Newsom to get Democrats on your side, but not so much that you don't get Democrats on your side?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the environment we live in today, where it's not just that there's political ideologies; people are ideological, right? And there's a difference. People have latched onto a template of ideology that they believe in, and if anyone deviates from that, they feel as though that it's not pure. And I do think that, obviously Faulconer from San Diego was kind of the mainstream policy kind of candidate for the establishment. But even that term establishment, is a dirty word for both parties in certain areas. Right. Whether that's right or wrong, it's just is how it is. And so the idea that the political operatives and the elites within the party are trying to talk to their passionate base in a way that says, look, let's focus on this list of things and not necessarily the culture wars. They're just having none of it. So, and I think Faulconer's poor showing in the election really puts the party in a bad position of redefining itself. So I am, as of now, I will tell you, no, they don't seem to be able to find anyone, because it used to be that the party was able to lead its constituents, its electorate. And right now, the Republican Party nationwide is really being driven by its passionate, very far-right base. And even though California is its own entity, it's seventh largest economy in the world and quite dynamic compared to other states, the Republican base in California aligns pretty closely with Republicans in Texas and other states.
Did Republicans, by way of this recall, kind of show their hand for the next election, maybe even shoot themselves in the foot? Because, here you've got this opportunity to, it's basically, an election, right. It is a referendum. It is by definition a referendum on Governor Newsom.
Right.
Didn't they kind of shoot themselves in the foot here by not putting forth an effort, or I shouldn't say effort, because then that it's kind of a judgment call, but by not winning this? Because now all of a sudden you're behind the eight ball for the next election.
Yeah, the recall vote was essentially a proposal of a no confidence vote to Governor Gavin Newsom, and he came out of that with flying colors. Essentially, he shouldn't read. I don't want to say too much into it, but of course, the question remains of what did he learn? What does this mean versus a regular election? But essentially, he got a confidence vote, and they did shoot themselves in the foot by not really realizing that there are many Democrats that are unhappy with particular aspects of Governor Newsom's policies. And of course, you should be free and you should criticize people you vote for, people you support. You don't just follow them blindly. That doesn't necessarily mean you want them recalled. But I think what they fail to realize is that there's a lot of room in the middle for Democrats and Republicans to come together. And if the Democratic base is much more liberal, then the Republicans could fill that vacuum with a much more moderated approach in terms of a candidate. So they're losing that opportunity because of the fact that people do want to solve problems in California, and not everyone, obviously the majority, are not ideologically driven as the Republican base is. And of course, this is evidenced by so many independents, non-affiliated voters that have grown so dramatically. So yeah, I mean, they haven't done themselves any service and built any goodwill with the millions of Californians that might not be entirely enamored with Democratic policies, but see the stark contrast between Larry Elder and the base as being a no-brainer. They're going to go with their party.
What kind of success can the candidates who were trying to replace Governor Newsom, what kind of success can they expect going forward, considering they've shot their shot?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that they have to be bold, and they have to speak to their base, and they have to be a little bit more direct with them and say, I hear you, but California is a broad-based coalition of people. I mean, there's multiple economic centers that they can speak to, and there's a way to tell people that you're being heard, but that you're also going to be hurt unless you expand your approach and your mindset. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work, because, of course, former Governor Schwarzenegger has made clear, without actually publicly declaring how he voted on the recall, that essentially this is a lost opportunity. But of course, that was, from 20 years ago, that mentality is no longer in vogue for the Republican Party. So it is a challenge for them to be able to speak to the base and say, I hear you. I'm not the best way for me to promote your issues is to get into power. And right. I cannot get into power as a Republican if I don't have your support in other policy areas, So they've got to cultivate a different understanding within their base, because right now the tail is wagging the dog, for sure.
David, thank you so much. I know it's a busy week for you. Appreciate the time.
I appreciate the invitation to be here. Good to talk to you.
My thanks to College of the Canyons Political Science Department Chair David Andrus for his time. And thank you for joining us on the Santa Clarita Valley Signal News podcast. You can email me story ideas or comments, abender@signalscv.com. And as always, the Santa Clarita Valley Signal News will have the latest information for you on all that's happening in the SCV and the 661. Thanks for joining us. Talk soon.